Welcome back and welcome to part 3 of this Blender tutorial series where we're creating this 3D lighthouse scene. So if you haven't seen the previous part, then you can check out the tutorial playlist with the link in the description. And so in part 1 we modeled the tower of the lighthouse, and then in part 2 we modeled the house which is next to the lighthouse. And in this part we are going to be setting up the lighting, and then we're also going to be adding the ground, and we're going to be making the grass, and we're going to be using geometry nodes to place the grass on the ground. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the tutorial files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. Now I did mention this in part 1 of the tutorial series, but for the lighting I am going to be using a paid add-on, the Physical Starlight and Atmosphere Blender add-on. So if you'd like to purchase the add-on, you can check it out with my affiliate link in the description, and if you purchase the add-on through my affiliate link, then I'll earn a small commission, and that's a great way to help support me and this channel. But I know that not all of my viewers are able to purchase paid add-ons, so if you don't have the Physical Starlight and Atmosphere add-on and you don't want to purchase it, then that's totally fine. You can instead use the HDRI link which I have in the description, and I'll show you how to add the HDRI into the scene to give it some nice lighting, and the HDRI does give the scene some nice lighting as well. And before we start, here's a video about the add-on. Physical Starlight and Atmosphere is an amazing Blender add-on for creating realistic skies and sky lighting. I've used the add-on myself and I highly recommend it. You can customize the sun, atmosphere, stars, clouds, fog, and more. The add-on also provides some outstanding sky presets, such as daytime and sunset, fog and haze, Mars, and even retrowave. You can also change the time of day just by rotating the sunlight. Check out the add-on with the link in the description, and by purchasing the add-on through my link, you'll be helping to support this channel. Alright, so to start off with this part, I'm going to be creating the ground. So I'll press Shift A, let's go here to Mesh, and I'm going to add a plane. And I want to make this plane very big, so I will scale it, and after I scale it, I'm going to type in 100 and then enter so that it's nice and big. And then I'm going to go into edit mode, and I want to subdivide this, so you can use the object context menu, and then you can click on subdivide, and then right behind me on the subdivide setting right there, right after you add the subdivide, you can just click on that arrow to open up the settings. Here on the number of cuts, I'm going to type in 100, so it's very detailed, and then I can close those settings. So I now want to turn on the proportional editing so that I can create some little hills and bumps in the landscape. So what I'm going to do is scroll right over here, and I'm going to click on this button here, or you can press the O key, and that'll turn on the proportional editing. So I can now click on some vertices back here, and I can hit G to grab. Then I can scroll my mouse wheel, and you can see the size of the proportional editing has changed when you scroll your mouse wheel. And so I can bring some parts up and then bring some other parts down, and I just want to make a few hills in the background. So the proportional editing will pull those vertices around with it, and that way we can make some nice smooth hills. So I'll make a hill here and like a hill over here, and we can adjust this later once we add a camera. I'm going to be adding a camera kind of like in this perspective, kind of like this. So later when we add a camera, we can adjust this a little bit more, but I just want to add a few hills here. And then what I also want to do is add just a little bit of bump all over the surface. So what we can do is click here on the proportional editing fall off, and on default it is set to smooth, but I'm going to change the type to random instead. So I'm now just going to select a vertex which is kind of in the middle here, and I'll hit G to grab, and then I can scroll my mouse wheel out until the proportional editing is really big. So if I now move my mouse around, the farther away I move it, you can see everything is going to be a bit distorted and just super bumpy. So I'll bring it like that, place it there, and then I can go back to object mode, and then using the object context menu, I'll shade it smooth. So now you can see there's just a little bump over the surface, and I might just do that a little bit more, so I'll just drag this around. So now you can see the surface is just a little bit bumpy. So now let's add a camera. So I'll go back to object mode, and I can press Shift A, and I'll go down here and add a camera. So now we can move wherever we want the camera to be. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to zoom my view kind of down here, so something like that. And then I can press Control Alt Numpad 0, and Control Alt Numpad 0 will bring the camera to where we are. And I do need to turn on the screencast keys, sorry about that. So now you can see my screencast keys right down here in the corner. Now I want this to be a square image, so I'm going to click right here to go to the render properties, actually right over here on the output properties, and here on the format you can see there's the resolution X and Y. So what I'm going to do is set the Y resolution and the X resolution to 2560. So that way it's going to be a nice high quality image. You could also just do 1920 by 1920 if you want it to be a bit smaller. What you can do is click here to select the camera if you're in the camera view, and you can hit G to grab to move the camera around. You can also hit R to rotate, and then you can double tap the X key, and that will rotate the camera up and down. And then I can hit G to grab, move this down here closer to the ground. And if you want to bring the camera in, you can hit the G key and then double tap the Z key. And then you can just bring the camera in, so something like that. Now, if I zoom right down here to the ground, you can see it's pretty bumpy where the house is, and I want to make it more smooth. So let's select the ground, and we'll go back into edit mode, and I want to go right over here to the proportional editing, and I want to turn the fall off back to smooth. So I can now just select a vertex here, and I can hit S to scale, and then I can scale it on the Z axis, and then I want to scroll my mouse wheel down until the proportional editing is smaller, and then I just want to bring it way down and scale it down on the Z axis, and I just want to make all those vertices flat, which are closer to the house. So I can go back to object mode, and you can see it's pretty flat right there. And then let's also select the ground, and I can press Control 1. Control 1 is going to add a subsurf modifier with 1 level. So here on the modifiers, you can see by pressing Control 1, it'll add the subdivision surface, and let's set the viewport levels and the render levels both to 1. And then if you want to edit the background horizon again, you can go into edit mode here, you can select some of the vertices, and you can just play around with the background, just kind of change the size of it, make some little hills here and there in the background so that it's a little bit bumpy. So let's now create the pieces of grass. So we're going to create 3 different pieces of grass, and they're going to be kind of like grass clumps, and then we're going to use geometry nodes to distribute them on this ground. So I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go here to mesh, and I'm going to add a plane. And I will move the grass over here, and then I'll press the period on the numpad to zoom into it, and I'll hit the tab key to go into edit mode. So I can now scale this way down in edit mode, and I also want to rotate it, and I'll rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees. Hit enter, and I can also scale this up on the z-axis so we have a long plane. And then the grass objects are going to be distributed by the origin point, so I want to bring the entire thing up, so bring all the mesh up until the origin point is right there on the bottom. And I'm doing that so that then when it's distributed, it'll be pointing up from that bottom part. Right, so let's go back into edit mode, and I want to make a small little piece of grass. So I'm going to box select this top point here. I'll scale it down, and we still have the proportional editing on. You can see that the other grass is moving along with it. So let's click right here to turn off the proportional editing, and you can see now that's scaling properly. So I'll scale this up, bring that down. So I can just box select the top point here, scale it down a bit, and then I can hit E to extrude and R to rotate, and I'll just continue to extrude this and move it and rotate it and scale it. And I'm going to make a little piece of grass coming right there. Then I can box select this point here and extrude that out, kind of have it coming forward a bit, and then extrude it out, scale it and rotate it, and extrude it, scale it, and rotate it. That is looking good. So there's the first piece of grass. So I'm now going to press Shift D to duplicate. We're going to duplicate this in object mode, and I want to make a second bit of grass, like a clump of grass. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'm first going to just box select some of these points and kind of rotate them and kind of change them just so that it looks a little bit different. Maybe rotate this over and bring it out a little bit. And we could also press Control R to add a loop cut. I can left click and right click so the loop cut stays in the center there, and I can maybe rotate this up, add another loop cut here, and just kind of make the grass a little bit different. Maybe also rotate it a little bit, and maybe even scale it down a little bit so that it looks a bit different. All right, so I can now press Shift D to duplicate, and I'll rotate this, and I'm going to have 2 little pieces of grass. I can also double tap the R key. Double tapping the R key will enable the trackball rotation, and I can just rotate this piece of grass, and I'll scale this piece of grass down, maybe box select some of these areas and kind of move this up, and just make the grass look different, because we do want variation and we do want it to look unique. So I'll just go like that. I can also select both of these vertices right here, and I'll extrude them out and scale them down, and I can just have another bit of grass which is kind of coming up and rotating over, so something like that's pretty good. And I can just hold down the Shift key and box select all those. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, bring this down here, and then I can select this part here, and I can extrude it and scale it and extrude it out, something like that, and scale that. And then I can select everything in edit mode, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I can rotate all of these. I can scale them down and just make it look a bit more unique and random. And you can see they're all rotating on their own origins. That's because I need to click right here on the transform pivot point, and I need to change this back to the median point. So that way if I rotate them, they all rotate together. So I'll make these a bit smaller, kind of rotate them by 90 degrees like that, Maybe bring it back a little bit. Maybe rotate this one up. And this one here, I can rotate that one up. All right, I'll go back to object mode. That is looking pretty good. So I now want to have one more grass clump, and this is going to be an even bigger grass clump. So I will select this one right here. I'm going to use this same one. So I'll press Shift D to duplicate, bring that over here. This is going to be the biggest grass clump. And actually, I think I'll bring it over here. So we have the smallest grass clump, then we have a medium grass clump, and then we have a large grass clump. So I'll go into edit mode, and I'm actually going to select these pieces here, and I will delete the vertices. And then I can kind of bring this up, rotate that over. I can select these vertices and extrude this out, maybe scale that down a bit. And this is going to be like some dry grass. Maybe bring that up there, okay. And select the entire thing, and I can duplicate it. So Shift D to duplicate, and I can rotate this around, rotate that piece over, kind of have it coming out of the same spot there, and maybe box select some of these areas and rotate that. I can also add a loop cut there, and then I can extrude this out, scale that down. All right, have another piece of grass kind of coming up to the side, and then I can select everything, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I can rotate it over just like that. Maybe have this one coming over to the side a bit, and duplicate this one here and rotate that one over. I'm going to go back to object mode, and that is looking really good. So then if you want to change the size of anything, you can. So I think this blade of grass here, I'll scale that down a little bit. So now you can see we have a big clump of grass, a medium clump of grass, and a small clump of grass. So I'm going to scale these down a bit more, and I actually want to scale them so they're closer to the actual size, but we can adjust the size later when we distribute them. But I'm just going to scale them a bit smaller, maybe like that. Once they're at the size that you like, or close to the size that you like, you can press Ctrl A, and you can apply the scale so that this is now the object's new default size. So we're now going to be using geometry nodes to place the grass on the plane here. So let's select the plane or select the ground, and we can scroll right over here on the workspaces, and you can click on geometry nodes. Now, if for some reason you don't have a geometry nodes editor, you can click on the plus here to add a new workspace, and you can go down here to general, and then you can click here on geometry nodes, and it's going to create a new geometry nodes workspace. So your workspace might look a little bit different than mine. I've kind of customized mine. So I have the 3D viewport right here, and then the geometry node editor right here, and that's really all you're going to need. So the 3D viewport to see the mesh, and then the geometry nodes. So if you select the ground object, you can click new here to add new geometry nodes, and I can just call this like grass if you want to rename the geometry nodes. So I'm now going to add the nodes which will distribute the grass points onto the plane. So I'll press Shift A, I'll go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the distribute points on faces node, and let's drop this here after the group input. Then I also need to press Shift A, go to the search, and I'm going to search for the instance on points. So this one here, drop the instance on points after the distribute points on faces, and you can see now the plane is missing. You can see it's not there, so I need to press Shift A, and I need to go to the search, and I need to search for the join geometry node, and I'll put this after the instance on points. So let's just get rid of these nodes, drag them down out of the way for now. So why we're using the join geometry is because we want to join the original geometry back up so that you can see it. So we'll take the geometry and we'll put that into the join geometry, and so now these nodes down here, these will be used to distribute the grass on the ground, and then the join geometry is joining the original meshes geometry back up so you can actually see it. So now we need to actually tell Blender what we want to distribute. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for a collection info node. We'll drop this down here. So this will give Blender the data of the grass, and then we'll plug that into the instance on points. Now we need to join all of the grass together into a collection so that we can actually use it in the collection info. So let's navigate over here to the grass, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select these 3 grass pieces. So once you have these 3 grass pieces selected, you can press the M key, and the M key is going to move it. Now you can see there's this collection here, and then there's the scene collection, but we want to create a separate collection just for the grass. So let's click on new collection, and I can just call this grass, and then just click on OK. And now if I open up the side panel here and go to the outliner, you can see there's this collection with all the objects, and then here's the grass collection with the grass. All right, so let's go back to the geometry node editor, and I'll press the 0 on the numpad to go back into the camera view. So if you now click on this drop down here, we have both collections, and we can choose the grass one, which we just added. And then let's take the instance, and we'll put that into the instance on points node. And then there's 3 other settings that I want to turn on. So I want to choose the separate children. I want to also click on the reset children, and I also want to click on the pick instance. So those 3 check marks right there. So now if I zoom out, you can see the grass is on the object, but it is way too big. So we can use these scale values right here to make it smaller. And we can also use this density value right here to add more grass. So I first want to make it smaller because it's way too big, but to make it look more organic and natural, I want the different pieces of grass to be randomly different sizes. So instead of just using one size here, this scale here, this is going to change the size for all the grass at once, but I want to make each one have a different random scale. So I'll press Shift A, and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the random value node. Let's drop the random value right down here. And then I want to take this value and I want to put that into the scale. So now this random value is going to control the scale of the points. So we now have a minimum and a maximum value. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key as I drag the maximum value to make my movements less sensitive so that I can control that a little bit better. So I don't want the minimum value to be 0 because if they're turned to 0, we actually won't be able to see some of them. So I want to make the minimum value just a very small value and then the maximum value pretty small as well. So for the time being, I'm going to turn my minimum value to a 0.001, and then the maximum value, I'm going to turn that to a 0.005. So now if I kind of look here at the 3D scene, you can see there's a bit of grass here and there. Now I need to make way more grass because there isn't enough grass. So I'm going to go here to the distribute points on faces, and I'm going to take the random and I'm going to turn that to the Poisson disk instead. So now we have this density max, and I can turn the density max up to add more particles. Now before I add lots of particles, there is so much more land mass which we actually don't need. So I'm going to press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and I'll hit the tab key to go into edit mode. And then I can hold down the Z button and go into wireframe. So now what I can do is just click and drag, and I'm going to box select all of these vertices which the camera can see. And then I want to delete the other vertices. So I will press Control I. Control I will invert the selection, and you can see everything else is now selected, and we don't need that extra geometry. So I'll hit X, and then we will just delete the vertices. So now if I go into the camera view and go back to solid view, you can see the scene is going to be much less dense because we are only using what the camera can see. So now I'll go back to object mode, and I can now turn up the density max, and this way it won't be quite as laggy. So now you can play around with the density max value to create how much grass you want, and I'm going to go with a density max of 60,000. So you can do a 6 with 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros after it. Now if you kind of look closely at the grass, you can see something looks a bit off here, and that is because all the grass has the same exact rotation. And so I want to put another random value into the rotation so that each blade of grass has a random rotation. So I'm going to click on this random value, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I can just drop it down here. And then this random value, I don't want the grass to be rotated all around in different directions. I just want the grass to rotate on the Z axis. So just rotate around. So to do that, I want more control from the random value. So I'm going to click on the float here, and I'll change it to vector instead. And the vector is going to give us these 3 values, which is the X, Y, and Z values. So now I can take this value and I can put that into the rotation. So this random value is controlling the rotation. So if you look closely at the grass, you can see now it's all shooting out in random directions. Now the minimum value, I do want to be a very small value, so the grass is just slightly randomly going around to the sides. So let's first just take all of the values here on the random value, and we're going to turn these all to 0. And again, these are representing the X, Y, and Z values. So right down here on the bottom one, this one is the Z one. So you can see if I rotate this around, it's going to just rotate the grass on the Z axis, but not the other axes. So let's just type in a big number like 1000 so that it's just super random and all the grass blades are rotating around. Now, if we rotate this one here and this one here, that is the X and the Y. And so I do want to rotate these by a very small number. So I'm going to turn both of these values to a 0.2, and that way the grass is just slightly rotated to the left and the right on the X and Y axis by 0.2. So they're just kind of slanted a little bit. So now if we go into the camera view, you can see it looks much more random now. And the size is randomized as well. And you can change the size if you want to, but I think the size of 0.001 and 0.005 looks pretty good for this scene. Although I think maybe turning the grass to like a 0.004 on the maximum looks a little bit better, so the grass just isn't quite as tall. And then something else I just realized is that the plane is actually too high up. So let's select the plane, and if I go down here, you can see it's cutting into the the house. So let's move it down on the z-axis so it's a bit smaller. That is much better. Alright, so I'm now going to be adding the lighting. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I will be using the physical Starlight and Atmosphere Blender add-on. However, if you don't want to use that add-on, that's okay. You can use an HDRI, which I will have linked in the description. So I'll actually show you how to add in both of them. So for those of you who want to use the physical Starlight and Atmosphere add-on, you'll just need to download the product files once you purchase the add-on. And then you can enable the add-on by scrolling right over here and clicking on Edit, and then you can go to the Preferences. And then click over here on the Add-ons tab, and you can click on this Install button. And then you'll just need to locate to the location of where you saved the zip file. You can click on the zip file and then click on Install Add-on. And then after that, to enable the add-on, if you don't see it right here, you can go to the search and you can start to type in Physical Starlight and Atmosphere, and you can see here it is. So just check mark the lighting, Physical Starlight and Atmosphere, and then you can also click on the Save Preferences button so that it's always in your future Blender projects. So I'll just now close the user preferences. So I'm going to hold down the Z button and I'm going to move my mouse up into the rendered view. And I am using the Cycles rendering engine because I am going for realism. I do want this to look quite realistic. So here on the render properties, I am going to be using Cycles. You could use Eevee, but I think Cycles will look a lot more realistic. And then once I am in the rendered view, I'm going to press Ctrl B in the camera, and I'm going to drag a box around the camera and let go. And that way Blender will only render what you can see in the camera view. And actually, let's go back here to the layout so that we have a bit more space. So I'll press 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and I can go up into the rendered mode. So now to enable the add-on, or to actually add the add-on into your world lighting, you can click here on world and then just click on the new button if you don't already have a world, and you can see here's the physical atmosphere. So you can just click on that to turn it on, and already we have some really cool lighting and some clouds and some really nice background sky. Now this physical Starlight and Atmosphere add-on will give you a sunlight. So you can find the sunlight and you can click on it, and I'm going to bring it up here. Now it is a little bit laggy in the viewport right now, and that's because of the particle system. So what I'm actually going to do is click here on the ground, and I'm going to go here to the modifiers. And then here on the geometry nodes, I can click on this monitor icon just to hide it. And now it's quite a bit faster in the viewport. It was just slowing us down. The geometry nodes was lagging the viewport. So I can now select the sunlight, and my favorite part about the physical Starlight and Atmosphere add-on is that you can double tap the R key to rotate the sunlight, and that's going to rotate the light, and it's going to change the time of day. So this is really what I love so much about this add-on. You can quickly change the lighting, you can quickly change the rotation and the time of day, and you can quickly change how the lighting looks. So when I was first setting up the lighting for this scene, I had it set as a daytime scene because I thought that might look nice, but then I decided to go with a evening scene because I can just rotate this around and I can quickly change the lighting, and so very quickly I can get lots of different types of lighting and I can see what looks nice, and I can also change the rotation. And so after playing around with the lighting for just a little bit, I quickly found that I really like this lighting here. So if you rotate the sunlight this way and kind of rotate it over, it's going to give you some nice evening lighting, and I really like that golden lighting. So I'm just going to double tap the R key and just rotate that so that there's some nice evening lighting shining on the lighthouse. Now also to make the lighting look a bit nicer, we can go here to the render properties, and right down here in the color management, we can make the view transform filmic, and then on the look here we can change this to very high contrast, and this will pop out the colors and make things more contrasty and saturated. Now I do want to play around with the cloud settings because right now there are some big dark clouds and I don't really like that. I want to be mostly a blue sky. So to change the cloud settings, you can press the N key to open the side panel, and you can scroll down here and click on atmosphere. And then if you click on this arrow here and drag down, that's going to close all the settings. And so there's many different settings you can play around with, like the stars and atmosphere and sun. I'm going to open up the clouds here. And then there's a bunch of different values you can change. So you can change the seed, and this will randomly change where the clouds are. So I'm going to go with like a -60. I think that looks pretty nice. And then you can also change the scale. So I'm going to turn the scale up quite a bit to maybe like a 12. You can play around with the scale value to change the size of the clouds. And I want to make the clouds less thick, so on the thickness here I'll turn that to 7. And then I'll turn the detail up to 10 so the clouds are more detailed. And then if I turn this dimension way down, now the clouds are kind of noisy, so I don't want to turn it down too much, but I will turn it down a little bit. And then this luminarity, I will turn that down a bit as well. Now the clouds are still looking a little bit dark, so if we go here to the lighting, we can turn this lighting intensity up, and I'm going to turn it up to around a 5 so that the clouds are a bit brighter. And then if I zoom into the clouds here, you can see they still need a bit more detail, so I'm actually going to turn this luminarity up a bit more so that they're more detailed. So now you can see the edges of the clouds look much more noisy, and that looks more realistic. Now for those of you out there who don't want to use the physical Starlight and Atmosphere, I understand it's a paid add-on, so I know not everyone can get it, and that's totally fine. So for those of you who don't want to use the add-on, then you can use an HDRI instead, and I'll have a link in the description to a great HDRI that I found to get some nice realistic lighting. So I'll press the N key to close the side panel, I'll click here on the world, and I can click on the X here to get rid of the world, and I'll click here on the light here, and I will just delete it as well. So I'll come back to the other lighting setup which I just created. I just want to show how to add in the HDRI for those of you who want to use the HDRI. So let's click on new here to add a new world, and then right here on the color, right here on the yellow dot, we can click on this, and we can choose environment texture, and then you can click on the open button and open up the HDRI. So here is the HDRI that I'm going to be using from polyhaven.com, and I downloaded the 8K version and the HDR version on Polyhaven. So you can just click on that and then click on open image. And you can see once this loads up, it also gives us some nice lighting. Now I want to rotate this around a bit because right now it's coming from the front, so it's kind of just all white and we don't have those nice shadows. So what I'm going to do is click right here to go to the shading workspace, and then I want to click here on object, and I want to change this to world instead, so we are working with the world nodes instead of the shader nodes. And then let's go into the camera view, and I'll hold down the Z button, move my mouse up into the rendered view. So I want to rotate this HDRI around so that the lighting looks similar. So with the HDRI selected here, I'm going to press Ctrl T, and that is going to add the texture, coordinate, and mapping nodes. And make sure you have the node wrangler enabled when you do this, because it won't work if the node wrangler add-on isn't enabled. So now right here on this rotation on the mapping, the rotation Z, I can rotate this around, and that is going to change the lighting because it's going to rotate the HDRI on the Z axis. So I find that a -100 looks pretty good for this scene, so a -100 will bring the sunlight right over there, and so we have kind of some similar lighting. And then also right here on this background on the strength, I'm going to turn this to like a 0.5, so it's only half as strong, so it's not quite as bright. And I also like those clouds in the background, that looks pretty nice as well. Now I also want to change the lighting just a little bit, so I'll press Shift A and I'll go to the search, and I'm going to search for the RGB curves, and we'll drop the RGB curves in between the HDRI and the background, so we can use this to edit the colors. Now I'm going to click here on the R for red, and then I can click here to add a dot in the center, so I can now drag this dot down here, and I'm going to bring it down, and I'm going to bring it a little bit more into this corner here. So you can see now the lighting looks much more like evening light, and the colors are a bit nicer, and I really like those pinkish kind of goldish colors for the evening sunlight. So if I click on the RGB curves and press the M key to mute it, you can see here it is before, it's kind of grayed out, and then if I press the M key to unmute that, you can see the colors are just a bit more vibrant. So I do like that better. So for those of you who aren't able to use the physical Starlight and Atmosphere add-on, this is also a great lighting setup for our scene. So I'll press Ctrl S again to save the file, and this will finish it up for part 3. So I hope you've been enjoying this, and thank you for watching, and when the last part is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen, and also I'll have the link in the description. And if you've been enjoying this tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, then some great ways to do that are by checking out my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, where you can get 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, and much more Blender content on my Gumroad and Patreon. And to support the channel here on YouTube, you can check out the YouTube memberships by clicking down there on that join button next to the subscribe button. And you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to send me a little tip if you've been enjoying the tutorial series. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the last part, part 4.